Greetings, and welcome to Dougy Dialogues. I'm Dr. Monique Mitchell, and we're webcasting from the Dougy Center in Portland, Oregon. The Dougy Center was the first childhood bereavement center in the United States, and we're recognized as an international leader in the field for children and families who are grieving. In these 30-minute discussions, Dougy Center staff will explore language, trends, theories, research, and other relevant topics related to death, dying, loss, and grief. Our intention is to continue to shape the professional dialogue, and we hope to spark some thought-provoking conversation along the way. Dougy Dialogues are primarily intended for a professional audience, so individuals who are working with others who are grieving. If you're more interested in lived experience or perhaps support for your own grief, we encourage you to listen to our podcast, Grief Out Loud. It's available on iTunes or one of your other favorite listening platforms. So welcome, and thank you for joining us at Dougy Dialogues.
Hi, I'm Alysha Lacey. I'm the Program Director at the Dougy Center.
I am Rebecca Hobbs-Lawrence, and I am the Pathways Program Coordinator.
And today we're here to talk to you about Pathways, which is our peer support program for families living with an advanced serious illness. Our Pathways program consists of a kids group, a teen group, a group for the adult caregiver, and a group for the adult with illness. Hi, Rebecca. I'm excited to talk to you today.
I'm really excited to be here with you, Alysha. Yeah, I love the opportunities to talk about pathways. It's so near and dear to my heart.
Me too, me too. So just to kind of get started, I was thinking about the way that our Pathways program just feels so very different than the rest of our programs. There's just kind of a unique quality about that. And I think for me, one of the reasons it's so unique is just because of the relationships we form with our families. And I was just kind of curious what it's like for you to be working with this population.
Yeah, I think it's important to seek out teachers in our lives, those opportunities where we can grow, and Pathways has certainly been that for me. Doing bereavement for a long time and having this experience in the last 6 years to work with our Pathways families. We talk about it being a privilege and being with them, but just the learning opportunities for ourselves and our own growth and being able to connect with them and our volunteers in different ways, because it is such a different experience, has been really powerful. What about for you?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I do think it is just a really beautiful privilege. I think I've maybe told you this before, but I feel like it's almost this like perk of my job that I'm privileged to this information that I hear that I think is just so special, and I'm able to learn from that. And I feel like it makes me kind of different human. And then I just really kind of admire our families so much for being willing to kind of let us into that part of their lives while they're accessing support themselves. Yeah, it is interesting just kind of thinking about relationship with somebody who we know they're going to die at some point, soon. I know that's different for all of our families, but I feel that is kind of marked on my mind.
It is. And as soon as they come in the door, we know we're going to be saying goodbye to them. And, we can't help but have that kind of, at least for me, thinking about how long will I be able to connect with them? How long will I know them? How much of their story will I hear? But in doing that, knowing that I'm saying goodbye to them, it really makes the time with them very precious also. And I know we have to have this boundary of a professional, relationship. We're there to support them. And yet because of the work and the way it is that you can't help but, have it come into your heart and be able to sit with that and definitely feel the honor that is, because it takes so much courage for them to be able to come through these doors.
Yeah, and we hold that space with ourselves and for the families, everyone who's involved, and then also for our volunteers. And I think it's an interesting role that you and I have to kind of hold all of that, maintain that professional boundary, and then also just acknowledge that we're all humans. And so we're going to feel, and that's actually a really good thing. We've created some rituals after a participant dies, and the way that we support our volunteers and ourselves. And so I think that's been a really helpful addition and kind of something it took us a little while to figure out.
Yeah, it wasn't something that we knew intuitively when we first started. Right. And I think one of the things that, we talk about pathways is just that openness to keep learning and changing to meet the needs of them. But as we kind of understand what those needs are, how do we better support them in that? So our rituals have certainly changed over the last few years in being able to do that. And I so appreciate it. And I find it really interesting that we have our rituals within each of those 4 groups of those people that we support, and our volunteers in those groups that we support. And I think we've become quite proficient now at adapting, right? I mean, we're constantly adapting to those groups and those needs. I love the candle lightings that we do. And we do them at Dougy Center for bereavement groups too, but there is something very special when we can light a candle and share about how meaningful a relationship was that we had with a participant and what we've learned from them, as they walk out of that group. And
speaking of adapting to change, which yes, we are always doing for pathways up to the very last minute. We've gotten very good at that, although we never know what's going to be quite coming up. We recently had to go virtual with all of our groups, but our pathways group also went virtual, which was a pretty large switch for us. And I have to say, I think it's going really well. It seems like the feedback we're hearing from our families has been, pretty positive, that there's a pretty consistent experience that they're enjoying, still being able to be together when we can't physically be together.
Oh my gosh, yes. And, right now I'm doing, which I wouldn't be able to do in person because there's only one of me, right? I am right now able to coordinate in the teen group and the adult caregiver group and the adults living with illness, and such very different experiences. But what I have so appreciated about each one is that even online, that they come on and there's just this kind of sigh of relief that they are able to meet kind of kindred spirits, those walking this path that most of us really do not have that experience doing, at least not so intimately, right? And being able to just see that regardless of what group they're in. And I imagine the kids are, the same way too when they come on.
I'm running the kids group now, obviously, and I was doing that when we were in person and now still virtual. And it is really amazing just kind of seeing how invested in each other the kids are. And they're really like, if somebody's not there, they're asking like, where's so-and-so, and they're kind of wondering about them. They're wondering about their family. And they're really intent in listening. Now, while they need to get their wiggles out and we try to do as much play online as we can, they're really very impressive at holding space for each other and really just kind of offering the empathy that I think I forget sometimes that 5 and 6 year olds are able to do for. So that's also a really just beautiful thing that I'm able to witness amongst some of the also craziness that happens with 5 and 6 year olds online.
It's a mixed bag, isn't it? But
of course, that goes back to that change thing.
Right. And they need to be that playful, kind of boisterous selves too, because that is part of their experience. And,
absolutely.
For me in the teen group, teens are so interesting on their own, they're doing their thing. We just had a couple new teens join us yesterday. And again, just to see them be able to connect and be so welcoming, it's like they know immediately, like, oh, you get it. You know what I'm going through. and to be able to offer that to families when they are facing so many unknowns and changes and just all the anxiety that comes up for them at that, I think is just incredible. So I'm so, happy that we're able to do that with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I do miss is our volunteers. We have just a few volunteers in our virtual groups. So important.
Yeah.
And because especially in your kids group, I mean, you had so many volunteers really in that one. And we still feel like we're missing a little bit of our team, and finding ways each month to be able to connect with all of them, whether they're virtually with us or not in our groups, just to make sure we keep that team, feeling that we have, because it's such a cohesive team.
Yeah, I do think there is kind of that extra level of nurturance that we have to give to, our entire team, of just feeling like we're supporting each other while we're supporting these families, and that connection is imperative. I think I actually noticed that with the relationship between you and I, is that we need kind of extra communication and extra check-ins and planning. And even if we're not, solely focused on like, what are we going to do today, and those things, just that we can kind of witness each other's experiences with this group feels really important, and that we're on the same page feels really important.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before, but it's so true that, when we go into a bereavement group, like, we're the coordinator of that group, right? And even though afterwards we talk to our colleagues, that Pathways is such a collaborative group and experience, with 4 different groups, volunteers in all of those groups, and us, that it really takes that kind of idea of being a team, to a very different kind of level than we're used to working with in our other groups. But I think that's part of the gift of it also, right?
Absolutely.
Is that we really we have to rely on each other as colleagues, but also our volunteers in different ways, and communicate with all of them. I don't know, I feel like my skills and my patience and just being able to share has really elevated, with Pathways.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think part of that is really just such our investment to the families. I know you are so invested, as am I. And I don't think that's any different. Of course, we are with bereavement families as well, but there's something different about Pathways. It just feels like this time is so fragile. And so we just want to support that space as much as we can. So extra communication, strong teamwork, all of that really pays off in that regard.
What would you say is like the number one gift that has been given to you with Pathways, as a professional and just personally?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, I feel like I'm flooded with ideas. I think the one is just around a shift of hope. I think that, and you started to teach me this lesson, and then our families have definitely reinforced that. But as I came into Pathways, you talked a lot about how just the perception of hope needed to be shifted, and how can we still hold hope for families who have somebody dying, or who someone is dying, and what does that look like? And that coming to a Pathways group doesn't mean you're just giving up hope, and this is the place where you go to resign it all, that you're just dying. And so I love that idea of just shifted hope and what that looks like in different forms. And I think we are just continue to be taught about that lesson.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I feel so similarly in that way. And part of the lessons learned with that sense of hope is the hope that you can live fully while you're dying, and having that role model definitely by the people who are diagnosed with the illness, but even within their families, how that hope shifts and how it changes, and learning from them too, the kids and the teens. It really helps my own perspective in those things that I confront in my own life. And COVID being one of them, it's interesting the last 7 months how much of it I kind of go back to what I've learned from our Pathways families and how I approach, you know, what we're doing during the pandemic and those lessons. So I feel like they are definitely life lessons.
Yeah, there's so much wisdom, right? And just kind of knowing that, for me, thinking that there is an end at some point and we don't exactly know when that will be. And so how do we kind of, you know, live our life to the fullest and make connections that are really meaningful, and all of the other kind of just beautiful things that somehow our families seem so wise to.
Right. I mean, they talk about sometimes having that expiration date, that we all have an end date, we just don't know when it is. And we really take it for granted and have kind of this illusion that we're going to live forever and ever. And in doing so, how we take so much for granted. And what they have really taught me is that, you know, that we really don't know. You know, we all have that end date, that reminder. They just happen to know kind of when their timestamp is a little bit more accurately than the rest of us.
Yeah.
And so choosing how I live my life and approach people and relationships, you know, what do I want to be known for? What do I want to leave behind? You know, those are all things that they're constantly sharing with me and inspiring me too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that kind of, I guess, goes back to the thought of just somehow in being able to work with these families, it kind of makes me a better person. You know, it really makes me think about my own mortality and just, you know, what that might look like and what we want to leave behind.
Yeah. It also teaches me that I'm still not an expert in saying goodbye.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
That I can be inspired and moved by it. And I think I'm far better than I used to be. But saying goodbye is really hard.
Yeah.
One of our participants just shared that, you know, I'm not afraid of dying, but saying goodbye, that when I don't know how I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And I find that even with them, you know, saying goodbye is hard to them, you know, to do with our families.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a way that I'm thinking of the teens? I'm not exactly sure why, but is there a way that the teens talk about that? Like,
they do, and you know, kind of like what you shared about with the kids, that they create that space of empathy that's so strong. I'm thinking about, you know, just recently, a young teen coming back into group and saying goodbye after the death of her father, and how the other teens just shared so much about what they gained from her and her ability to be so welcoming. She was there the longest, and they weren't afraid to say goodbye. You know, they knew they were saying goodbye to somebody who's been incredibly supportive to them, and yet they did it with such courage. And so it reminds me that, you know, again, just being authentic in where we're sharing from.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they did that, and then of course the adults do it in their groups all the time too. And I think it's a shared experience in our Pathways groups with that space.
Yeah.
Right.
Another phrase I feel like we use often, and you kind of alluded to it, I think in the beginning, it was just talking about how our Pathways group, we initially thought it was going to be kind of a bereavement group, moved upstream. And then we, you know, quickly learned lessons that not so much. You know, I mean, there are elements that we use in both kinds of groups, and Pathways just has this different flow to it that we've really had to figure out as we've gone along.
It really does. And sometimes it's hard to articulate even exactly what that is. You know, I wish I could come up with the word that was like, this is why it's different, the word. And I'm still working on it.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think it's all of those things we've been, you know, sharing about, is the unknown, moving into the unknown, and the anxiety that goes with that, and all the challenges that they're carrying. Like, all of that goes into this very different experience. It's not just grief before a death. It's grief and so much more in that way. And being able to hold that space. Yeah. What are your thoughts about that?
Gosh, I mean, I agree. I think I wish there was just a concise way to sum it all up. I think it's really, I don't know, it stands out to me right now is just the impact that any one person can have on our lives, and how it's just this really special opportunity where we're able to connect people, and we're really just facilitating that connection, and they take it from there. Again, such a kind of fragile moment, and a really rare opportunity for that connection, and that creates something that I guess is maybe beyond words for both of us right now.
I was just thinking that we've used this terminology and kind of training around the raft in the river kind of, analogy, and in saying, like, I wish there was this one word, and I can't think of it, but I go back to that analogy where, in our bereavement groups, death is this anchor, and that everything that happens is moving away from that moment, that event, and hopefully in hopeful ways, ultimately, even if it's years down the road. And what we are witnessing with our Pathways families is that they're in the river before the waterfall, right? And without oars, and they can't get to the banks, and they are in there and they're not sure where they're at in the river. They can hear the waterfall, but they don't know how close it is. And the louder it gets, the more anxious they get with all those unknowns. And we're just a part of that with them and witnessing it, knowing they're heading towards the waterfall. And that to me, that's still kind of that symbology really encapsulates how I feel about Pathways too. Like, supporting people before the waterfall and all that anxiety is a different experience than supporting them after they've gone over and they're going back down the stream.
Right. Absolutely. I love that analogy. I do feel like it's such a powerful way to kind of describe, the different things that our families tell us about their experience.
Me too.
I feel like actually we're probably reaching our time, so maybe that analogy is just a lovely thing to end on.
Right. I really appreciated being here with you today. I know for both of us, Pathways has been a kind of a life-changing experience to participate in our professional jobs, and has shifted and changed us. And I'm glad I've been able to do this with you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Rebecca.
Thanks, Alysha.